wages decrease, which is why not only the radical left, but also the more commercially minded right wing was in favor of that. It's the same reason they're in favor of mass migration. It just lowers wages for people. A lot of women, however, seem to feel not that they have the choice to go to work, but that they have to. And this is expressed in a famous study that came out of UPenn and was published by Yale in 2008, which was the paradox of declining female happiness. And I love the way this study opens up. Right in the abstract it says, despite the past 35 years, I'm paraphrasing, but despite the past 35 years showing so much marked progress and improvement in the lives of women, women's happiness, according to this meta-analysis, has declined, both absolutely and relative to men. So it's not even just that everyone got more miserable because of, I don't know, a bad economy or something. Women in particular became less happy, despite all these objective improvements to their lives. So to me, the obvious rejoinder to that is, well, maybe those objective improvements, namely feminism, that's the thing that happened between 1973 and 2008, maybe that wasn't an objective good. Maybe that was just illusory.
Well, to me, the obvious rejoinder of that is that women are becoming disillusioned with the life they had prior. They're like leaving the cave, so to speak, allegorically. And also, I don't think you should use self-reported happiness as a metric of justice or any like objective good, because you can plot self-reported happiness with pretty much any variable. Like highest reported crime, violent crime in the United States, also is directly correlated to self-reported happiness. Does that mean one causes the other? No. Does that mean we should think
what do you mean by that?
Crime
Highest violent crime is correlated?
I'm just saying in the periods of time when we've had the most violent crime in the United States, there's also a correlation between highest rates of self-reported happiness.
Well, not according to the survey I just cited, right? Well, if happiness has been declining steadily, especially for women since 1973 to 2008, you had a major crime spike in the early 90s, but you didn't have a major spike in happiness. So perhaps there's some survey that you're referring to in some city somewhere,
well,
but it wouldn't.
But also, even women living traditional lifestyles are seeing a downfall in happiness. So why is it that the women who are still living the type of lifestyle that you would probably prescribe to women are also having a decrease in happiness?
Also,
I'm not convinced of that.
The Institute of Family Studies that are big, and there's a lot of data out there that actually children make you less happy. So there is this problem happening where we're like, okay, why are people less happy? But we don't know. We don't know what it is.
I'm not so sure. Again,
and then you would expect then that if you looked at the most unhappiest countries, you would expect Canada, the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, because they're very egalitarian, and you're not seeing that they actually have higher happiness levels.
Well,
than
they have the highest
here.
rates of alcoholism in the world. You think of Denmark, Norway, Iceland in particular.
So
I don't know how happy they are.
Now you're changing, but if we're gonna just go by what makes people happy,
I
don't know if I think there are arguments to be made about like community and those things may make people less happy. But this idea that's because women aren't having children, when we also have data, a lot of data that shows children, especially in the United States, has the biggest happiness gap. And then we're seeing that other countries that are more feminist are also not having, like, if you compare like Scandinavian countries to like the East, like my parents are immigrants from Iran. Iran has really high unhappiness levels. A lot of countries
naturally,
yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you can say that this is causing that, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Nordic countries also have much more homogeneity, which is correlated with political happiness. But so they're all of those differences. Mm-hmm. But I think the point about children making you unhappy and the point about leaving the cave, I think those are both a little bit of a cope, because they're belied by the fact that if it were just that women were coming into their own now and they were recognizing the oppression of which they were not conscious previously, then why would they keep getting less and less happy? You know, at a certain point, aren't you supposed to turn the corner and become more happy in your independence? But that's not what's happened. For 35 years, it just gets worse, worse, and worse, including relative to men. And then for children, you look over the past, 70 plus years now, 74 years, since 1950 to present day, the marriage rate has dropped by 60%, and the birth rate has dropped by 50%. So just looking at the whole society, we are having many, many fewer children than we were before, and yet we're much less happy.
Even like
places
like Pakistan are having less kids.
Sure, I'm just pointing out. You're saying that having fewer children makes you happier, and I'm saying we're having many fewer children, and Americans are much less happy. And you see this even beyond just random surveys.
You can't link that.
I kind of want to push back on this idea that we've gotten more unhappy as time has progressed, because at least to my understanding, what's happened in the last 20 or 30 years is an increased awareness of like mental health and what that means. So it's not necessarily that people were really happy before and now suddenly are miserable. Yeah. It's just that now we're actually having data where people can talk openly about their mental health, unhappiness, and not be as stigmatized as before. Mm-hmm. If we look at the 1950s and even like housewives around that time, we see like there is actually like a huge rate of like narcotic usage and basically like prescriptions to that level. So I'm not necessarily, if I would go as far to say, we've gotten unhappiness as time, we've gotten more unhappy as time has gone by. I would say more likely, oh no, we've been able to properly report, measure, and assess mental health as time has gone by.
And medicate.
Listen, I'm very inclined towards your view that social scientific studies are bunk. I mean, there's a major replication prices. I think it's all ridiculous. I will cite those social science stats when they serve my argument, because why not? That's what we do these days. But I agree. I'm skeptical of measuring happiness and all the rest of it. But on the mental health point, I think here we do have some pretty firm data, and it contradicts the argument you're making, which is right now, 1 in 5 middle-aged women in the country is hooked on antidepressant drugs. On any given day, they're taking them. Women are 2.5 times as likely as men to take these depression drugs. It is ubiquitous at this point. And the rates of taking depression drugs are going up. It's getting much worse. So if we're not getting less and less happy, why do people keep taking more and more depression drugs?
Well, why were housewives in the 50s downing like a bottle of wine at lunch every day? I'm just saying now
I'm not so sure. I mean, these are anecdotes.
We're supplanting self-medication now with actually like medically backed drugs that actually help women with their mental health issues.
I don't know that
it's also now that when you're sad, you just go to the doctor and they give you antidepressant drugs. I don't know how much more depressed people actually are, other than the fact that they're just dishing them out to everybody.
And they're dishing them out more and more and more. Sure, you can blame the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry. I'm just pointing out, in order to argue against these social science statistics, one has to just turn toward unfalsifiable anecdotes and memes. The housewives were all miserable in the 50s. They were secretly, drinking behind their husbands' backs. But I don't know, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. All I have are the data available to me.
Well, the data is just saying that
worse.
more people are on antidepressants. It's not telling you why. It's not telling you what caused it. It's not telling you.
Depression, presumably, is causing it.
That's what we're debating here, is what could have caused it. You're saying, it's
no, but I'm not saying, maybe they hate their husband, maybe they hate their kids, maybe they don't like the weather in their town.
Like, I think ADHD is a great example of this. Anyone now can just be like, I have trouble focusing. Does everyone have ADHD, or are people just getting these drugs? Like, these are questions that we should ask before we jump to a conclusion.
I agree. Look, I think that they're pathologizing a lot of ordinary aspects of human nature. But I think part of the reason that we do that is because we're so radically misinterpreting human nature, which brings us right back to feminism. The clearest example of this is the transgender argument, which is all anyone ever talks about these days. I'm frankly sick of it. We know that men and women are different, but that shows you, a major confusion about human nature. If a man can become a woman, then we have been really wrong about anthropology for a long time. And most reasonable people know a man can't become a woman. But that error in human nature goes back much earlier than transgenderism. This is why I have pity for the feminists who are trans-exclusionary radical feminists, because they don't realize that it was their own ideology that led to this. The premise of transgenderism is that men and women are basically the same, so much so that one can become the other. But if that's true, then that has to come from somewhere. And where it came from was the redefinition of marriage, to say that a man and a woman is the same as a man and a man is the same as a woman and a woman. And that comes from the sexual revolution, and that comes from feminism, which says a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. I agree. These errors in human nature can lead to all sorts of problems.
Did you say transgenderism is people thinking that there's no differences, and why would they need to transition?
That's a great question.
I don't think that's what transgenderism believes, that there's no difference between men and women.
Transgenderism believes that men and women are so similar that one can become the other. Which is different than the feminists who say men and women are so similar that a woman can do anything a man can do. But transgenderism takes that principle to the extreme, which is men and women are so similar. They're not complementary. Sex is not immutable. It's not an inseparable accident of being, as an Aristotelian or St. Thomas Aquinas might say. But no, it's actually just kind of a social construct. And it's so socially constructed that I can go down to my doctor and have him reconstruct my chest, and all of a sudden I've magically become the opposite sex. That error comes from feminism.
Okay, before we pivot to transgenderism, can we go back to the happiness feminist conversation and tie it up? So I wanted to ask you, do you think that should be the ultimate good and the metric for which we base like our justice system and our just overall societal progress on, is self-reported happiness?
Well, I don't know even what you mean by societal progress. I mean, justice is a habit of virtue that inclines the will to give to one what he deserves, right? So it's about deserts.
Right.
And so we protect certain rights and we enforce certain laws, or at least we used to. We don't really do that as much in this country anymore. And an aspect of political justice would be human flourishing. So when we talk about happiness, I'm very interested in happiness, but I'm interested in happiness in the way that Aristotle's interested in happiness, which is eudaimonia, a way to live the best possible life. And I think that we can know something about that through our faculties of reason, which are objective, and if reason weren't objective and at least somewhat reliable, we couldn't have self-government. Now, the way that happiness is often used in our modern culture is just
hedonism.
Is hedonism, like the utilitarians, right? Just means getting pleasure and avoiding pain, or is just totally subjective, to the point where you say, well, don't yuck my yum. You know, what's de gustibus non disputandum est. You know, maybe I like this and you don't like this. Well, sure. I mean, restaurants have menus for a reason, but there must be some limiting principle here. We must know something about what is conducive to human happiness. And if we don't, then how do we have self-government?
So I want to go back. I agree. I just don't know if self-reported happiness is more congruent with the subjective reports of happiness, or that eudaimonia that you're referring to.
Sure, it's just the best we've got.
Well, and also
I totally agree.
Something you said in the beginning about individualism, like, do you prefer sociocentric countries? Do you not love America and the?
What do you mean sociocentric?
Like countries where, like, you're like, oh, part of the problem with feminism is so focused on the self. Well, I think that is one of the cornerstones of like Western civilization. Is instead of being
it's a very liberal view of Western civilization.
Yeah, which I think is what makes Western civilization so wonderful. Like, we are one of the only, I think we are like the only one founded on individualistic rights, like principles that we.
I don't think we really are founded that way. I think that's what people say we were founded on now. But you know, you hear a phrase like liberal democracy. That's the popular way to describe our country now. That phrase appears basically nowhere in the English language until the 30s. Then it jumps a little bit in the 40s. It really doesn't take off in English literature until the 80s. America, the Founding Fathers didn't think of us as a liberal democracy. They were influenced by some Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke and Montesquieu say, but they were also influenced by the classical tradition. And the classical tradition is one of the common good, not in the communist sense of that. But again, they thought the common good was best pursued by having individual rights instead of, like, that's one of the reasons we founded ourselves on a separation of church and state. You have the right. We were not founded on a separation of church and state. Yeah, I mean, we can get into that. I think sure. It's well, incidental to this point, but it appears in no founding document. There's one errant letter from Thomas Jefferson to a friend that mentions the phrase, and the Treaty of Tripoli makes some little knock on Christianity to appease the Muslim pirates who were capturing our sailors. But you know, when the First Amendment established no church at the national level, the reason for that is not that there was a firm separation of church and state. It's because there were already established churches at the state level in many states that persisted for decades after the Constitution. The only reference to God in the whole thing is that you can't have a test for political office. They purposely left it out. You're saying that they didn't need to found this. They refer to religion explicitly, and they say we won't have a church at the national level because we have churches established at the state level. It says that? Where does it say that in the Constitution, that we're only doing this because we have churches? Not only doing that, but we can see it in history and in the ratification debates. That's why in a number of states for decades after the ratification, you had established churches. And this changes through 19th century jurisprudence, unfortunately, but that has nothing to do, obviously, with the founding of the country. Furthermore, you have in the national anthem, which also comes from the 19th century, the notion that this be our motto and God is our trust, which is from a forgotten verse of the Star-Spangled Banner. You also have it in our money. You also have it in the benedictions and the invocations of the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. So you also have it in the speeches of George Washington. And so, John Adams says that the American government will be based on the Christian morality. John Jay, first Chief Justice of the United States, says the same thing. He goes even further. Yeah, and I'm sure there's a bunch of quotes I can pull out from the other side. You can. There aren't really. Franklin. Yeah, there are. There's one from Thomas Jefferson. God took the Bible and cut out every reference to the supernatural and kept the rest for wisdom. Thomas Jefferson did make a commentary on the Bible and his views were a little odd, I grant you, but I've already granted to you that in a private letter, Thomas Jefferson advocated for a separation of church and state. And our Constitution does, right? There's there's a separation of church and state. Where? You have the First Amendment. Where do you see? Congress shall make no, I mean, I can pull it up, we can read it word for word, right. But I mean, like, it is there. We didn't just all let's just read it. This. Yeah, listen, sure. I didn't go to law school, so.
While she looks that up, one of the other questions I wanted to get into. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof. Right. So now where do you see a separation of church and state? There? Well, when you say Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that is that separation. Right. And so what is the Congress? The federal government, is that what you're saying? So you're saying it's the lawmaking body for the federal government, right? Yes, but if before the incorporation doctrine, if the state of California starts to be like, actually, in all our schools, we're going to start enforcing Christian ideology in our public schools, that would be unconstitutional under this First Amendment. In fact, that was the way that basically all schools operated in the country until the middle of the 20th century. Until the Supreme Court said that you can't have prayer in schools and you can't teach the Bible. Because of the First Amendment.
Well, no. The middle step was the incorporation of the Bill of Rights to the
okay,
states.
Sure, but that's been incorporated unless you don't want that part.
Right, but you're just saying the country was founded on the separation of church and state. I'm saying that wasn't even brought up as a matter of jurisprudence until many decades later. And then it wasn't enforced in schools until a century after that.
Yeah, because no rights were, right? That's what the incorporation.
No, I think
I guess
there
I'm
were
just confused.
rights.
Do you believe the Bill of Rights is like a founding document or not?
The Bill of Rights is a list of 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution.
Do you believe it is a founding document when it comes to like basically the United States as a whole?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, to me, I don't understand why the conversation is continuing, because if you believe the Bill of Rights is integral to the founding of this nation, and the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, states that no religion shall be.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I think you're misunderstanding what that phrase meant to the people who wrote it and the people who lived under that government.
It just seems to me, where would the misunderstanding be?
I think you're misunderstanding that the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states at the time, and the lack of an establishment of a church at the national level does not imply that there cannot be an establishment of a church at the state level, which we know for a fact there was at the time of ratification.
I guess I am a little bit confused, because I don't understand if the Bill of Rights is part of the federal basically legislator, right? It's part of the federal law.
But we have a
and
federal
we are
system.
but the whole point of creating the Constitution, and according to the Federalist Papers as well, is that, we need some like overarching law that, goes throughout the nation, so that way that we can be a united nation.
Not exactly. So federalism, right, refers to the principle of subsidiarity, to the view that there would be different levels of government, frankly, all the way down to the individual, right, and the family and the community and the state and the national government. So certain powers and rights were reserved to the federal government, but they were relatively small at the ratification of the Constitution. And then many rights and laws and powers were reserved to the states, and then some were reserved to the people.
So do you think it's bad that the First Amendment now applies to all the states?
Let's try to keep it a little more focused on this. So I have a question for you guys. One, do we live in a patriarchy? And if so, and I want everybody to respond, do we live in a patriarchy? And if so, is the patriarchy good or bad? We'll start with Farah, come this way, and then we'll have Michael.
I think it's such semantics at this point. As of now, I'm going to say I don't think we necessarily live in a patriarchy. Do I think women are marginalized in a disproportionate way in relation to men? 100%. But would I use the term patriarchy as a blanket term? Not necessarily.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how a person is defining patriarchy.
Well, let's maybe start off by defining patriarchy.
Okay. If we're defining patriarchy as a system of power where men uphold most of governance and social power, I would say that there is an argument to be made that we currently live in a patriarchy. Whether that's good or I personally am of the thought that that's bad, but yeah, it depends on what definition you guys want to use. I'm open to it.
Do you guys concur with her definition of patriarchy?
Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Basically, it's a system of power where men hold
most of the capital.
Yes,
the social.
basically
Yeah,
most of the capital, social, political power.
So obviously we know historically this is true, and if we're looking at a global level, are we going to refine it to United States, because these are going to be very different conversations.
And West, we could also
in the West. So I would say
West.
and you see this, that it's more prevalent in countries that are poorer, that have less technological advancement, as industrial machinery became a thing, and education and all that. And so now I don't think in the West, I'm not going to sit here and say women don't have equal rights. I think some of that history in certain ways, in maybe culture and our perception of men and women is still here, but no. And I would say that it hurts men and women to the same degree in some ways. Yeah, I would say that.
Okay, so Farah, you don't think that there's a patriarchy, or are you unsure?
I think the word patriarchy is a bit harsh, and I don't know if I would apply it to how we live in the West now.
Okay, but you two do believe there's an
argument to be made depending on what level you're talking about when it comes to power, or how much power you have to establish patriarchy.
Michael.
I guess I kind of think more than you do that we live in a patriarchy, not as a matter of law.
Yeah.
The law says we don't. The law, if anything, is inverted. We're closer to a matriarchy, except we don't have kids anymore, so there are fewer mothers. But as a matter of practical living, I think we still do live in a patriarchy. I think men wield probably more power than we ever did. It's just in a very perverted way. So men, wield the power to have casual hookups. Women statistically tend to not prefer casual hookups. Men tend to like them quite a lot more, and women prefer a longer lasting relationship.
That's what I would agree with. I think
marriage,
that's what I meant by cultural currency. I think men have the monopoly on like the cultural zeitgeist, and then women move in lockstep to like men's desires and the male gaze. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
In terms of politically, I don't know if I would agree as much, but I agree with that definition.
Totally. And so, the irony though is that all of that sexual revolution came about because of feminism, but it didn't really give women, I think, what they thought they were going to get. I think if anything, it gave men more power. I remember thinking about this many years ago when I was in college, and the hookup culture was really burgeoning. I thought, is this the greatest trick that men ever played on women? That these women who call themselves feminists think that they're going to be empowered by letting men just use them whenever they want and then cast them aside and go sleep with some other woman. Girl power.
I completely agree, and I actually don't think women are the culprit or feminists are the culprit today of hookup culture. I think it's more like neocons, tradcons, pickup artists, the one who says that you need to unpack the female psyche by like...
Traditionalists don't support hookup culture at all.
And I think
say as a proud traditionalist.
Yeah, I would say that also there's a distinction between the moral question, like if you're a woman and you hook up, like that's part of what the sexual revolution was there to do, is to give women autonomy, to be able to consent to things, to not have a scarlet letter, attached to them forever because they decided to do a hookup. And then the other question is it healthy? No, not the same.
Of course they do.
If you look at social attitudes,
a 304.
Yeah, but if you look at social attitudes in the last 20 years on things like casual sex, basically it's moving in this direction. The whole reason you have a show is because most people think like me and you have something to fight against.
I don't think so. I think I have a really popular show because a lot of people are living under our cultural zeitgeist, but they realize that it's wrong. And
Some people, but if you look at polling and stuff, especially if you look at where like the institutional power is, like in media and academia and stuff, like we have that power. We definitely influence the culture. And if you look at polling and you look at like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, how people felt about casual sex. So I agree that there's a moral question and what's actually good for you. And the truth is there is a small number of people, like women tend to have more restricted sociosexuality than men do, but there are some women.
What do you mean by sociosexuality?
Sociosexuality is how open you are to casual relationships. There's like an inventory, and they like look at your desire, your behavior, your attitudes towards it, and men typically are more open to it than women are. But there is some there's like 10% or 5% of women who still, and I don't think there's anything wrong with those women going out and doing that, but I do think we need to put more of an emphasis on like, okay, the moral question, whether you're a whore if you do this, that's separate from, is this good for you? Is this going to make you feel good? Is this what you really want? I think it's separate.
Why would it be separate? If morality is concerned with what is right and what is wrong, and we are rational beings that recognize that some things are better than other things, then wouldn't it stand to reason that if you do more good things and fewer bad things, if you pursue more virtue and less vice, that you would be happier and flourish?
Maybe, is eating a donut immoral?
It depends if you've had like 5 donuts already.
Well, then we just have a different, to me, I don't think like eating fast food is immoral. It may not be good for you, but it's not immoral. And there isn't like this stigma associated with it where it's like, oh, nobody, like,
No, sex is obviously, I think, even more fundamental to human nature than donuts are. And I like donuts plenty. But, sex is very, very important to human nature.
That's true.
In part because the action is what propagates the species, or in our sterile age, does not propagate the species. But, you're a trained lawyer. Passed the bar exam, and you have spoken publicly about how because you've made other career choices, you really can't work in the law. A firm would fire you. So it would seem to me, putting aside the justice or injustice of that fact, that there is still a major stigma associated with sexual
But a lot of firms would actually hire me over you, probably still into
I don't have a law degree.
No, but my point is that some of the things you say are so controversial that with how I think I saw a little bit clip of your last thing where you said like Yale would like deny you even went there.
I think they want to burn my diploma.
That's my point.
That's a very liberal place.
Is that society is shifting and we're becoming more okay with things like sex work, but we're still not there 100%. But we still are very quick to cancel misogyny, and I'm not agreeing with this.
I wouldn't say Yale is representative of the broader society, though. It's a kind of, and I love my alma mater.
If we're talking about law firms, if we're talking about good like big time law firms, like they would have a harder time.
Wait, just a clarifying question. So you're thinking, broadly speaking, people will find a conservative political pundit more objectionable than
in academia.
I totally agree.
In academia, in higher education, and in like corporate America,
Okay, I think you're probably right about that. Tells you a lot about the society.
Yeah, you can argue that, but to say like there are firms out there that would still take me over you.
But in reality, look, I mean, it's a funny line, and there is a lot of truth to that. But a lot of these videos that go viral from this show, in fact, and in the broader like Redpill manosphere stuff, it's women who are being shamed for their sexual behaviors. Putting the justice or injustice of that aside for a second, those videos get a lot of views. Those attitudes are still very, very prevalent. And I think it's because no amount of feminist indoctrination is going to alter basic aspects of human nature. And I think men broadly don't want their wives to be promiscuous. And look, everybody has a past, and I think there's all sorts of redemption and repentance, and I think that can all be great. But no one, as La Rochefoucauld said, hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. No one, I think, really deeply desires that, and I don't.
The men who watch the show are going to selection bias there because they're going to be more likely to not desire that. They're probably going to spend more time on the internet. There's all these.
It's a very popular show, though.
But like this idea that men want a body count of 0 is not really replicated, I think, in normal society. That like you may not, they may not like you. Obviously, there's a spectrum here. Like your girl doing porn is different than having 3 bodies, right? Like different, there's gonna be different levels of men who are okay with one and not the other, but we do have a culture war for a reason, because there is enough people on this side who are like, actually there's nothing wrong with having casual sex, actually there's nothing whatever about doing OnlyFans. And I think tradcons can be super happy living a tradcon life, but you guys are the ones telling us we can't be happy and there's nobody out here on our side.
No, look, we're observing certain facts of society and mentioning them, and but also we're recognizing that the liberal view of society, that we're all just individuals and don't yuck my young man, that doesn't really work because we live in society. So I keep bringing up the trans thing because it's just the clearest example of all these different topics we're talking about. The pro-trans argument was, just let me dress up in a skirt. How does it bother you? I'm doing it in the privacy of my own home. Stop yucking my yum. Okay, fine. Okay, well, if I'm going to wear a skirt, you're going to call me Shelley. All right, Steve, I'll call you Shelley, fine, whatever. Oh, okay, and if you're gonna call me Shelley, and I'm gonna wear a skirt, then I'm gonna go use the women's bathroom. Now, hold on, Steve, sorry, Shelley, you can't, my daughter goes into the women's bathroom. Well, I'm a woman, and I say I'm a woman, you have no damn right to say that I'm not a woman. Well, no, I do have a right to say you're not a woman. I do have a right to suggest that you not behave like a weirdo in public, and I do have a right to say you get out of my daughter's bathroom, because I've got faculties of reason, and I live in society. And to quote John Stuart Mill, who's one of the most important liberal thinkers of all time, in his essay on liberty, he points out, we want a lot of protections for privacy, but there are not really any totally private vices. If a guy is just a big drunk and he just drinks all the time, maybe he does it in his own home and it doesn't bother you, but then maybe he neglects his family and his family can't eat, and then maybe he doesn't go to his job, and maybe he doesn't pay his taxes, and maybe he doesn't contribute to the community that he lives in. And maybe we have a right in the political community to put some limits on individual autonomy, because it's degrading to individuals, and you get all the individuals together, that's your society.
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of want to push back on the idea that basically being trans is the same as being a drunkard. And I think the reason why is because
I'm not saying they're the same. They're just both
similar.
A bit deviant and suffer defects of will and intellect.
Okay, I guess my question to you is, when does something deviant become harmful? Because there's a lot of deviant behaviors out there. I don't think most of them are harmful. I don't think most of them are bad. But obviously you think that there's something bad about being trans and being drunk enough to do the analogy. So my question is, when does deviance become harmful?
And do you believe it should be enforced through law, or are you just talking social? Do you think we should put in, because there's a lot of rights that we hold up even when they're free speech, people say mean words, but we still are the right is so important. Guns, they
sometimes we have limits on speech.
Of course, I think I agreed with everything you said. There should be limits. The question is, where should those limits be and how should they be enforced? And that's my question.
We should probably arrive at them through prudence and very carefully. Okay. I don't think there's a right 5 bullet points on a napkin answer to this, as some ideologues do. I think we have prudence for a reason, and it's the my dear, it's the consummate political virtue. But also, when you say should it be enforced through social norms or through the law, I'm not sure there's a total firm distinction here. It's very fashionable of the libertarians to say politics is totally downstream of culture. So, sure, that's true in as far as it's true. But also the law is a tutor. And so the law creates certain incentives and disincentives. If you're going to punish certain behaviors, you're actually going to get less of that behavior. And if you encourage certain behavior, you're going to get more of that behavior. So it comes back to the transition.
Well, I mean, there's still a big difference. I actually like what you guys do. I watch it because I like to hear different opinions. No, I like to listen to different opinions and stuff, but I have no problem with you getting on and trying to advocate for like getting rid of things like no-fault divorce. Now, if you guys pass the law, like I think you should have the complete right to do that, convince people, but passing the law is a very different thing.
Well, you'd have to pass a law if you're talking about a law, right? You're talking
yeah,
about,
but I think it's much different to try to get people to not get divorced or advocate for that position.
Well, look, I think everybody, unless you're the most hardened radical feminist maniac, you don't like divorce, right? You're not saying we want more divorce.
But I think people should have the freedom.
Right, so you're merely talking about the right. And so I guess my question then is, put aside legal divorce for cause. What is gained by no-fault divorce? What's the good of that?
Oh, there's a bunch of good when it comes to no-fault divorce. Previously, when we had fault divorce, people would literally have to like lie or commit vices in order to be able to get divorced. So whether it was like...
Why don't they just not get divorced though, if there's no fault?
The problem is if they decide to like not get divorced, usually that leads to like higher rates of unhappiness. It leads to people having like more tension within their marriage. It prevents, well, yeah, there is tension.
Does it? I don't know. I'm not convinced of that.
Well, yeah.
Again, because I think, happiness